I've recently finished watching Season 2 of the Netflix adaptation of Alice in Borderland, and I have mixed feelings about it. First, I'll give my overall thoughts and then go into spoilers, so let's get into it. As a whole, I am disappointed as I am a big fan of the original manga and a lot of things were simply poorly adapted, and being completely honest, disregarding the original work, I thought that as a standalone series it was fun but not a very good one. It's clear they didn't have the biggest budget for this, so a lot of the CGI and special effects ends up looking like some sort of PlayStation 3 cutscene. Nowadays, since a lot of blockbuster movies have astounding CGI, Alice in Borderland special effects feels particularly outdated. As for the acting, a lot of it came across as overacted and very exaggerated or simple line reading without much emotion. I can say there were many performances I was captivated by. My favorite one was probably Kyuma, but even that one I won't be remembering for the next 10 years. There's this strange lack of direction in certain scenes where every actor seems to be doing whatever they want. There's one scene in particular I'm thinking of where a character dies and you have one of the characters flipping out and another one acting like they barely care. It seems very strange to me that this was the final cut for a Netflix series. As for the story, I will better illustrate my points when I go into spoilers, but there were a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies which were either better explained in the manga or simply didn't exist in the original work and were added for no apparent reason. So in general, the series isn't great in terms of execution. I still think it's a fun series simply because the script and premise carry it through its rough edges, but it's nowhere near a masterpiece and it's certainly not something I would ever rewatch. It's certainly a fun series to watch with friends because it's a good series to discuss while you watch, and I'm still grateful because it introduced me to a great manga that I love, so I'm very happy that this got adapted and seemingly popular. It gives me hope that other anime and manga can be adapted in the future, hopefully better, and with bigger budgets, so that we can end this stigma of all anime and manga adaptations sucking, because up until now we don't have a very good track record. There are manga that for their very nature I don't think could ever be adapted into live action, nor would I want to see that. For example, there are rumors about a One Piece live adaptation and it's just, why? It's a series about a pirate made of rubber with the most wackiest character designs ever. Just keep it in animation, please. But there are obviously other series which I could see being very successful in the live action format. For example, I see no reason why a Monster live adaptation with real actors couldn't be very good. I'm making this video in January of 2023. If they did make a live action adaptation of Monster in the future and it was bad, then please forgive me. I wasn't trying to jinx anything, I just wanted something good to watch. So on one hand, the Alice in Borderland live adaptation wasn't very good, but on the other hand, it did introduce me to a great series which I loved, and hopefully its popularity can lead to other better adaptations. But maybe that's just the optimist in me speaking. If you haven't seen Season 2 yet, I recommend that you do if you enjoy the first one and maybe come back to this video later, because now we are going into spoiler territory. You have been warned. Okay, my first complaint is a general one, but I think they omitted or simply removed a lot of context which would have made the character interactions and outcomes make a lot more sense. For example, in the King of Diamonds game, they didn't really explain the background of any of the characters besides Kuzuryu and Shishia. In the King of Diamonds game, the twitchy guy that seemed to be on a lot of illegal substances was in fact a mathematician, so he wasn't so much crazy as he was perhaps too intelligent for his own good in a game where you have to take into account logic but also the personalities of the other players you're playing against. In the Jack of Hearts game, they didn't really explain Yaba's background as a successful businessman and why he was so enamored with the Borderlands, so in the end, when Yaba and Banda make a pact and decide to team up together against the Jack of Hearts, it feels a little bit rushed and out of nowhere. I know that in a live adaptation you can't be as detailed as you can in a written format such as manga, but you could at the bare minimum write the character's profession next to his name on the screen or something, and perhaps add a little bit more to certain dialogue scenes and cut on stuff that was a bit unnecessary. For example, in that Jack of Hearts game, they added in Shishia to the game, and looking back I don't think he added much, so they could have cut him and added more dialogue time to the other characters. So my main gripe with the series is because they remove a lot of context and character interactions, a lot of characters' actions end up coming off as out of nowhere and unjustified, or seem actually a bit nonsensical with the things we have seen on screen. For the games themselves, there are three in particular I have to mention, and the first is the Jack of Hearts. I loved the Jack of Hearts game, it was one of my favorite games in the manga. I love that because it has no time limit, it promotes dialogue between the characters, and also in the context of the story, it provides a safe haven from the King of Spades. So in a way, this game in the context of the story rewards inaction. The only catch is that in order to survive, you have to have someone that you can trust, so it fits the theme of Hearts perfectly. I was actually pretty bummed after I finished reading the Jack of Hearts in the manga because I love that game and I thought there's no way they're going to adapt this because it's an extra game, as in it doesn't feature any of the main characters. And in order to feature any of the main characters, I thought they would have to change the script completely, and they didn't, so they ended up adapting the Jack of Hearts by simply cramming in Shishia to the script, which ended up feeling awkward. I understand the rationale, this is a short series with limited episodes, so you don't really want to have filler episodes without any one of the main cast, as the audience wants to follow someone that they know, but by adding in Shishia without any changes to the script, he ends up feeling like an extra, so the main character actually ends up feeling like a tertiary character that shouldn't really be there. Even in that final scene, it felt like Shishia was added in post-production. He didn't really fit there, so I would have rather they removed him completely, kept the original script, and used that extra time to explain Banda and Yaba properly. Then there's the Queen of Spades. This is a Netflix original game, and those usually suck, as is the case here. One of the weaknesses of the original manga, in my opinion, is that the author actually didn't show many of the face card games, presumably because he didn't want to drag out the story too much. Here, because this is a live adaptation and they want to fill some episodes, they do need to add 1 or 2 extra games to make the season feel more complete. Or they could use that time to flesh out the characters better for the few games they do have, but I digress. We saw in the first season that they either changed games to make them make less sense, or they added in games that didn't make a lot of sense. For example, the first game of the Netflix adaptation is actually Netflix original, it was a completely different game in the manga. But at least that first game had a certain twisted logic to it. Here, the Queen of Spades, as soon as they finished reading the rules out loud, I was screaming at my screen because it was so unbelievably dumb. The Queen of Spades is a very poorly designed game, starting with the fact that it's a game whose optimal strategy is simply not playing. They start with 2 teams and play for 16 rounds at a time of tag, and each time someone gets caught they switch teams. Each team has a member that cannot switch their team, and at the end the team with most players wins. Okay. They try to play with the fact that, much like in the Jack of Hearts, the players can use this game as protection from the King of Spades, but here it doesn't make nearly as much sense. I mean, is the Queen of Spades team just going to keep growing indefinitely? Why did her team only have 4 people? Did no one really think about that? Also, in the Jack of Hearts, everyone was hesitant to act because they didn't know who to trust. Here, the queen is right there, and she made a stupid dumb game where you can simply agree to catch each other and defeat her at the end. It makes 0 sense. They don't even have to run, they can just sit around and wait for the final round. It's such a massive oversight that this game has an even number of rounds and the queen plays first, which means the players will always play last. So in the final round, it doesn't really matter what happened in the previous 15s, the final person can just catch all of the players back and defeat the queen easily. If this game had an odd number of rounds, or the queen played second, it would still be incredibly dumb, but at least you would have 1 final round of actual stakes. Here, I don't even get why people are running around like some psychedelic chickens, because they don't need to, they can just wait around. It doesn't make any sense if you think about it for more than 10 seconds. Then there's the King of Spades. In the manga, he had a mini-map that showed where the players were at all times. It made sense, it added more danger to the threat, and it even created a subplot line where the players were trying to destroy his mini-map in order to get an advantage over him. Here in the Netflix adaptation, with how much time they spent fighting him, I don't really understand why they removed that plot point. Once again, Netflix removing things that made sense for no reason. Then there's the fight itself. If you read the manga, you know that the King of Spades never actually fought this many people at the same time. Here in the Netflix series, he felt much more superhuman, which has its good and bad things. The good thing is, I have to admit, that fight scene in the back alley where they were all ganging up, it was super brutal and gory, and I liked it a lot. It was very cool. I did think it was unintentionally funny how, while everybody is fighting for their lives against the King of Spades being brutally maimed and cut up and shot, Arisu is spraying spray like a dork, but you know, it's just Arisu being a dork as usual. But because of how excessively brutal the fight was in the series, it begs the question, how did any of these people survive? If you notice in the final episode, they entered the Queen of Hearts with the sun up, and by the end, it's nighttime, so they were there for hours. How didn't any of these people bleed out? It just doesn't make any sense. I found this super funny, especially because a few episodes ago, my poor man Tata bled out from an injury that seemed so mild in the live-action adaptation I thought they were going to let him live. They just did my poor man Tata dirty. And this brings us to the final episode, the Queen of Hearts, and boy, this episode in the Netflix series was not good. The first thing they screwed up was make Arisu not drink the tea offered by the Queen of Hearts. There's this short scene in the Netflix series where Usagi looks at Arisu and Arisu nods and they both agree to not drink the tea. In a vacuum, excellent decision, I would have done the same, it was smart. However, the problem here is that it completely ruins the scenes that follow. Arisu started becoming susceptible to the Queen of Hearts' bogus stories and started hallucinating because in that tea was some sort of substance that did make him hallucinate. Yes, there is an element of metaphor both in the series and in the manga to Arisu's mental state, but in the manga there was also the very real element of Arisu being poisoned by the tea of the Queen of Hearts and tripping out of his mind. Here it doesn't really make much logical sense why he started becoming so involved by the Queen of Hearts bullcrap stories. I don't care how persuasive or charismatic you are, you cannot make someone hallucinate with the sheer power of your words. That is just not something that is conceivable. Then there's the whole story that precedes this final episode. In the manga, Arisu was a very tortured character with a lot of survivor's guilt because of his friends, because of Tata, because of Kyuma, who he felt a very real connection with and ended up eliminating in the King of Clubs game. In the manga, between the King of Clubs and the Queen of Hearts, Arisu does not play a single game, which is not the case in the Netflix adaptation. I wouldn't say that Netflix Arisu doesn't suffer from the same problems as manga Arisu, but the character arcs were clearly different. So in the final episode, when you have Netflix Arisu going through the emotional struggle that was meant for manga Arisu, it ends up feeling overdone and exaggerated. For a series whose main critique I have is cutting a lot of content, that final episode really dragged on, especially that final scene in the clinic. Man, they really milked that for all it was worth, and quite honestly, I don't think that sour milk was worth much. It's like they were trying to cram in substance in the final episode that should have been there from all of the previous episodes in the series. As a final note, for people that only watch the Netflix series, there was a sexy scene between Arisu and Usagi in the manga. It wasn't anything lewd, it was just a bunch of silhouettes embracing in the darkness. It was, it was a nice touch, and once again, why remove something that didn't really detract from the story, much on the contrary. So yeah, this adaptation wasn't great, it just makes me hopeful that maybe because of its popularity we can have some better adaptations with bigger budgets, and I'm still grateful for it, for introducing me to a manga that I loved, but I won't really be rewatching this anytime soon. So this was the video for today, guys. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you liked the video, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye bye.